Okay, thank you all for joining us today for our first of two Microsoft security briefing sessions. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to engage with Ravanty. Ravanty is a Microsoft partner that has a team packed with expertise in all things Microsoft. The team at Ravanty is ready to help organizations deliver a more collaborative, more productive, and more secure experience. A few housekeeping items for today. This is a live event that is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with each of you. If you have any questions on any of the content presented today, feel free to enter them into the Q&A chat and our team will take action to help answer them. For our speakers today, Lai, who is our principal architect, and Yasai, who is our co-founder and CTO. These two gentlemen come loaded with a deep wealth of knowledge around Microsoft's tools and its impact on end users. And I know, in fact, I guarantee you will walk away with more insights on security with Microsoft's suite of tools by the time this is over. All right, enough for me. Lai, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. And welcome everyone to part one of the Microsoft Security Briefing webinar today. I'm excited to be discussing about the fundamentals of Zero Trust and explore how Microsoft security solutions can address today's evolving threat landscape. So what's on the agenda today? What are we here to talk about? So we're going to go through the overview and the objective, kind of give you guys an idea of what this meeting is all about, or what this webinar is all about. Really understand why we're here to discuss the topics of Zero Trust. Jump into the current threat landscape in today's modern work, really understanding what that threat landscape looks like, really understanding and diving into some of the types of common security threats that we're seeing, then defining what Zero Trust is and its principles, explaining the pillars of Zero Trust, going through some Microsoft security solutions that can address these pillars, and then also applying the Zero Trust framework to address security threats. And then Yesai is going to go through and show us a series of demonstrations on how we can utilize Microsoft technology to really address these security threats. Specifically in today's session is going to be around the identity and endpoints component. And then in the next session, we'll go through the data and apps component. With the time remaining, we'll go through some Q&As, as well as discuss the path to Zero Trust. What does that mean? What does it look like? And then kind of close it out for any remaining items we need for the call. Right. So what is our objective for this webinar today? The idea here is really to equip organizations with the comprehensive understanding of modern security challenges and really provide insights into those security threats. We'll be focusing on real-world scenarios and also showcasing the Microsoft security stack to address those security concerns within the real-world scenarios, right? This briefing is really meant to keep customers up to date on the latest security trends and really how to effectively protect organizational assets. We want to make sure that we're raising awareness about all the current emerging security trends, provide you guys with that preparedness to equip your organizations with the tools needed to prevent, detect, and respond to security incidents, show the best practices for maintaining a strong security posture, and then really being able to provide how to, the best practices and methods to respond to incidents. And it also will segue to essentially what we're going to be talking about, which is the threat landscape and how that impacts organizations. So jumping into the threat landscape, we can't talk about security threats and solutions without first recognizing why these security threats happen, right? And what's causing it to be a major pillar that we need to understand and really identify and tackle. So as we can see, right, in the changes in the landscape is happening on a rapid pace. We're seeing that technology advancements can introduce a lot of vulnerabilities, and the rapid pace of development and adoption means that we have to also have a rapid pace for adopting to those new technology advances. We're seeing a lot of increased complexity in IT environments, right? Your IT environments are having multiple solutions, multiple endpoints, multiple connections that it makes the environment much, much more complex than ever before. And then, of course, the whole topic of AI, right? There's the sophistication of AI-driven cyber attacks. We're seeing a lot more usage of AI, not in just the daily work, but also cyber attackers are using that as to their advantage to also pinpoint it and attack organizations with AI-driven technology. In addition, productivity and ease of use, right? We know that organizations want to obviously be productive, and security essentially is always second thought, right? They're always putting security essentially behind and looking at how ways to improve productivity. And because of that, we need to make sure that there's ways to balance that security and productivity in a proper manner. We want to make sure that things such as shortcuts and bypasses to user efficiency is not emphasized, and we're looking to make sure that there's a proper balance, as mentioned, right? Things such as reusing passwords and sharing accounts across multiple systems, that's not good practice, and we're seeing a lot of that, and we want to make sure that there's ways of addressing that, right? Furthermore, the shift to hybrid work, right? We're seeing that obviously a lot of companies post the pandemic is transitioning over to hybrid work, and that's still rampant within a lot of organizations, right? The use of hybrid work and remote work is definitely in place, and because of that, things such as personal devices, personal networks, unsecured networks are being leveraged to access corporate data, right? And because of this, it's introducing new vulnerabilities and introducing security risks that potentially can compromise sensitive data and systems, right? And furthermore, it's difficult to secure that remote work, right? Because a lot of the remote environments, it's not managed by the central IT system. And so we're seeing a lot of trends in how to make sure that even though the users are working remotely on their personal devices, on their BYOD devices, we need to make sure that those companies and those remote work is being protected when accessing critical systems. We're also seeing a lot of overlapping technologies, a lot of integration of multiple platforms. And when you have a lot of multiple platforms and systems, it can be complex and challenging, right? And so therefore, organizations need to establish clear security protocols and make sure to implement appropriate security measures to protect against those multiple platform integrations that we're seeing, right? And then there's always the interoperability between different technologies, which essentially causes additional vulnerabilities and risk, meaning one system that gets compromised can potentially lead to other additional systems that gets compromised. Lastly, the lack of user awareness, right? Their organizations do not have the sufficient training programs to train their users to make sure that they're up to date on the most prevalent security threats, and it leaves organizations vulnerable to those attacks, right? Users and humans are prone to making mistakes, and therefore adding that on top of the lack of user awareness or the misunderstanding and not using security best practices adds to that additional potential of getting cybersecurity attacks and threats to your environment. So all of this, when summed up, leads us to essentially the evolving security threats, right? With all the changes in technology, with all the shift to hybrid work and all the factors mentioned previously, there's an inherent change in an evolution in security threats. Cybersecurity threats are constantly evolving, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated, harder to detect. And as mentioned, with the power of AI, it's making it even harder for organizations to protect themselves. Not only are they evolving, but they're coming from numerous attack vectors, right? You're seeing all these different components coming in and attacking organizations and users from different areas, from different paths, and trying to really penetrate all the different layers within the organization. Based on Cybersecurity Ventures and Statista, as of 2024, the global cost of cyber attacks was estimated to be about $9 trillion. And this is primarily on ransomware, phishing, and data breaches, really driving the increase in the cyber attacks, right? And they're estimating that by 2028, that number is going to grow to around $14 trillion, right? And that's a pretty large amount, right, to consider when it comes to cyber attacks and the cost of cybercrime. So in order to make sure that organizations are protected, we have to look at cybersecurity as a whole, as a holistic approach. And we're going to be jumping into really how that works, how we can leverage things like zero trust to make sure that we are protecting ourselves, protecting our organizations, protecting our data from all these sophisticated cyber attacks. So jumping into the component of zero trust. So we've heard of zero trust before. So what does zero trust really mean, right? Why is that important? So the idea of zero trust is really to essentially not trust any user, device, or application inherently, and really to make sure that even though they're already inside the corporate network, we still require continuous verification of identity, device health, application access before granting any resources to those users and devices, right? The three principles of zero trust are to verify explicitly, to use least privilege access, and to assume breach. Verify explicitly essentially means to consider every data point before authenticating someone's access, including their identity, their location, their device, as well as how the resource is classified. So if there's anything that's unusual, we can red flag and flag it for for denial or so forth. The principle of least privilege essentially means we want to give the least capabilities necessary, the least privilege necessary to the users for them to do what's necessary for their day-to-day job. We don't want to give them unlimited access. We don't want to give them indefinite access, only what's necessary for them to get their job done, right? And then assume breach. Assume breach means to assume that there has already been breach within the environment. There's already been a compromised user, a compromised device. And if so, if we assume that there is already breach within the environment, how do we make sure that if there is that such case, that other components, other data, other technology, other items within the environment are also protected, making sure that we are requiring end-to-end encryption so that way if there is a breach already, that we still are protected within the environment itself. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Yasai to jump into the different pillars of zero trust, as well as dive into the Microsoft security solutions. And then he'll tie that all together and show the different demos around the Microsoft security stack and utilizing the zero trust framework to apply the security solutions. Yasai?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lai. And hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here today to continue our conversation here on discussing zero trust. And I'm going to kind of get into and discuss the different pillars of zero trust. Also provide you some insights on the existing threats and the threat landscape. And then the most exciting part is get into demos, actually show you some demos that we put together to kind of show you and articulate how we're applying the different security solutions that Microsoft offers in a demo environment so you can actually see them in real time. So what are those pillars of zero trust for modern work? So as you can see, it starts with identity. So, we have 4 major pillars, but we start with identity, we have endpoints, data, and apps. So identity is that true cornerstone for zero trust, right? Once we, a lot of organizations have, their approach to identity is fragmented. They have a lot of different identity providers. They have different SaaS applications, so they don't really have a central location to manage all of their identities, manage all their authentication, verify each identity as they're signing in, right? A lot of organizations struggle with that because they have, applications on-prem. They authenticate some users on-prem to an on-prem file server. They use a different SSO provider for, say, accessing certain applications. There's no central location where we're authenticating and authorizing all of that access. So identity is that true major first cornerstone for that zero trust journey. Now, as you go from identity, you get into endpoints. So many organizations have a lot of different endpoints, and honestly, that's the weakest point in the zero trust journey for many organizations, right? Because you have different types of endpoints, you have different types of devices. People bring their own devices. So you want to, as I mentioned earlier, you want to verify, regardless if they're in your network, if their devices, you can't always assume that traditional network access controls are enough, because they're not today. You don't want to only say, okay, I have a firewall, I'm protected. You want to actually verify that device connecting. If there's something wrong on that device, and we'll see that shortly when I actually kind of get into my demo, you want to verify that device. You want to make sure that, hey, even if it's a corporate issued device, if something is not right on that device, if the device is not compliant, for some reason something is off with that, we still want to restrict access, even though it's in our network and even though it's our own device. So endpoints is very, very critical in the is a critical pillar in the zero trust journey. In our subsequent webinar, we really hope you're able to join us in part 2 of our webinar series, where we'll get into talking about more in the data and also in apps. Now, we wanted to showcase and kind of talk about the different Microsoft security solutions, how we're going to use these different security solutions to kind of reach our goal of truly being a zero trust organization, right? We look at the different pillars and the different security solutions to address all of those pillars, right? And it all starts with identity, honestly. I can't stress the importance of how important identity really is in your zero trust journey. Using Entra ID, which is a full identity and access management solution, you're able to use all of the different solutions that are available. And you'll see that shortly when we get into how we're applying those security solutions, how we're using things like conditional access to not only require a user to provide strong authentication, but also to authorize that access, to look at the different conditions for the user and actually validate whether or not we're allowing that user to sign in. If the user, authenticates, provides strong authentication, but they're coming from a location that we don't recognize or we don't trust, we still want to reject that sign on. So we're going to look at how we're using and how we're leveraging conditional access to obtain that goal. We're also going to look at like Entra ID protection. Now, it's not only enough. Now, Microsoft security solutions with today's AI world has a vast number of tools in real time using AI and machine learning. They're able to evaluate thousands and millions of threats and sign-ins on a daily basis and understand whether that existing sign-in, is there a risk with that sign-in? Is something off with that sign-in? It's not a matter of just looking, oh, what's your IP? Where are you coming from? There's a lot more to it. With the sophistication of today's attacks, Entra ID protection analyzes all of those risks and signals to really validate whether this is a valid sign-in or it's not. And if it's not, if there's some sort of risk detected, it's going to say, well, I have a feeling this is not you, so I'm gonna force you to do another step authentication, or I might ask you to do a secure password reset. So we'll see that shortly when I kind of get into that demo. And when it comes to like least privileged access, they also provide like privileged identity management, where you provide just-in-time access for your admins. Now, one thing we've seen organizations, it's easy, right? You go, you want to, you have a list of help desk, you have different team members, say, hey, I need global admin access. And you say, well, why do you need global admin? Oh, I need to make these changes. Well, you want to, before you provide or grant them global admin access, you want to verify what exact permissions they need and only provide that permission that they need and do it just in time. Most times, more often than not, you don't necessarily need to have admin access, as an example, at all times. You need it for 1 hour or say 2 hours, and you can go and elevate yourself and grant yourself access, do what you need to do. So this example kind of paints that picture of providing just-in-time access and least privileged access. There's also other sets of solutions like identity governance solutions available within Microsoft Stack, and access reviews, and Defender for Identity for customers who have on-premise environments. You have Defender suite of products to protect authentications against your Active Directory domain controllers. As we transition from that identity pillar, I also emphasize the endpoint pillar, because for many organizations, that's, like I mentioned, it's a weak point, right? It's where your zero trust journey can really be unsuccessful if you don't have a proper way of managing your endpoints, knowing your endpoints, and also having compliant endpoints. And we'll see that shortly when we kind of get into our demo, right? Using, Intune and the device management, we're able to create those different compliance policies to say what do we consider a compliant device. There's also, along with in Intune, there's like Windows Autopilot for automatically provisioning all your devices, for provisioning your corporate managed devices. And also Microsoft provides your endpoint security, end-to-end endpoint security using the Defender suite of products. These are products I absolutely love, and I'm going to show you shortly in our demos how valuable they are and how much power they bring to your organization. So especially for customers who have that Microsoft 365 E5 license, if you're not leveraging things like Defender Antivirus, Defender for Endpoint, and we'll as we get into, say, data and apps, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Identity, these are valuable tools that you can implement in the Microsoft security stack that can really hone up your security and really bring you to that security state. So we'll see that shortly. There's also things like BitLocker for providing device encryption. So it's really end-to-end solutions that Microsoft provides in their security solution stack. Now, like we talked about the different types of threats, right? There's all types of threats in the environment. I mean, this list and this image you see here, there's quite a lot of, attacks, and this list is growing, right? These are just some examples of the way that, things are happening in the environment, right? Unauthorized access, some of them honestly start with the basic level. As you can see, common denominator is that the cornerstone and the first major pillar is identity, right? It's verifying that identity. Who's that user signing in? Who are you that you're signing in? You validate yourself. Are you providing me a strong authentication method? Great. Well, you did all of that. Are you authorized, or should you have access to this application or where you're trying to connect? And if you don't, we need to make sure that you have a mechanism to reject that sign, and we'll see that shortly. Other things like weak password hygiene, risky sign-on, those are very critical components in that identity pillar. Now, as we kind of get into endpoints, unmanaged, devices, you have users connecting with all types of devices. One of the common things that we hear out there is, how are we going to ensure that only our corporate managed and compliant devices connect to our network? How can we do that? Like, how are we going to determine that? That's where, using the power of Microsoft Intune and having that full-blown device management for all types of your devices that connect, whether that's Windows, which is most common, right? Mac OS, your mobile device, iOS, Android, and we'll get into also in subsequent webinar, we'll get into like the apps and using Intune app management and mobile application management for, say, BYOD mobile devices. So we'll kind of get into that as well. Right, so that's very critical, and controlling and knowing which are your compliant device. Now, on top of that, honestly, that's not enough. The other threat vector is all your malwares, right? there's malware, there's viruses, those are also being in the environment. So it's very, very important that you have proper security solutions for all this. Now, what makes Microsoft so great is they provide that end-to-end security using a vast number of security solutions, which are all interconnected with one another. You have Microsoft Entra ID for your identity. Then you have Microsoft Intune for device management. And then you layer that with Defender suite of products, Defender for Endpoint, Defender XDR. They all tie together, talk to one another. And the great part is that they use the signals from each other to provide you that full-blown defense in depth security strategy, right? Because it's one thing when you have multiple tools that don't talk to each other. Think about it where you have one person checking your identity, and then you have a different tool that's checking your devices. Well, do they talk to each other? Does your identity provider tell your device management provider, hey, I think this identity is bad, do they talk to one another? Well, a lot of times that's, as Lai mentioned, using one of the weak points in the threat landscape is having multiple tools, right? Having no interoperability between each other. That's what makes Microsoft so strong in that it's able to provide you that full end-to-end solution across all of these pillars, and it kind of comes together. And you will see that shortly when we look at some of the demos, we're going to see how all of those signals kind of tie into one another. And as we move forward, in our next series, we'll get into how you can protect your data, right? How you can use the power of Microsoft Purview to protect your data, to prevent against things like data breach, sensitive data, leaving your organization, right? These are all things that customers today really come to us and say, I have all this data. How do I protect it? How do I make sure? How do I know what data I have, right? So that's an important pillar. And then apps, I'm excited to also talk about apps and using Defender for cloud apps and how that looks at all the different types of cloud apps that you have in an environment and bring you that shadow IT so you can visualize and understand these are all our SaaS applications that we access. How do I protect it? How do I unsanction them? So we'll kind of get into all of that as we move forward. So now we did a lot of talking. So I want to kind of get into our demos. So I want to show you how all of these solutions kind of come in. So before we kind of get started on the demo, I wanted to kind of paint some of these scenarios so you kind of understand what are the scenarios that we're actually showcasing and how we're applying that technology to that specific scenario. So in our first scenario, user attempts to sign into Windows 365. This is a cloud PC solution offered by Microsoft. So user attempts to sign in, and as they perform MFA, they're presented with a screen and they authenticate with Microsoft Authenticator app. They get a push notification. They authorize that notification, but for our organization, we want to require stronger authentication. We want to provide that phishing resistant authentication. We say, well, we need you to provide an extra layer of security by providing UR502 security key. We'll see that and how that applies. And we use the power of conditional access to require that, you have, whenever you're accessing Windows 365, you have to provide that second, a stronger authentication method. We'll also look at another scenario where we block all sign-ins. So we say for all our users, we block all sign-ins except once they're signing in from a Windows 365 cloud PC. Now, you might use this in scenarios where you have, say, contractors or other employees where you don't want them to use their own devices. You don't issue them company devices. So instead of that, you provide them their own cloud PC, which if you haven't used, by the way, it's amazing and it's a great solution. You provide them their own cloud PC, and they use that to sign in. If they attempt to sign in using their own device, they're blocked and restricted, and we'll see kind of how that plays a role. We'll also look at what happens with if you sign in from a non-compliant device. You get a message stating that you need to use a compliant device. We'll see that and how we're using the power of conditional access, and also blocking unknown device platforms. If you sign in from, if a bad actor, what we've seen common and we've seen in different sign-in logs is bad actors will sign in with these, really odd devices, and they'll modify the user agents on these devices, and we'll kind of try to, kind of confiscate what they're signing in with and obscure it. So we'll see what happens when conditional access comes in and detects that, oh, you're signing in from an unknown platform, we're going to block it. And also we'll look at, I talked about Entry ID protection, and we'll look at what happens when a user is at risk. There's risky activity on the user, Entry ID identified that and provided a layer of protection. So in our first demo, we're going to show you signing in against Windows 365. So here we have user Alan. Alan's signing in and to their Windows 365 Cloud PC. After they perform that initial MFA, they think they're able to sign in. However, the organization requires that you provide that stronger authentication method, provide that what's called phishing resistant MFA factor, Alan gets that screen to provide that extra layer of security, and they use their FIDO2 security key, and we'll see that how that works and how that kind of comes in. Once they do that, once they authorize that second layer of security, then they're able to successfully connect and authenticate to their Windows 365 Cloud PC. So here we have user Alan. Alan is signing in. They're at their Windows 365 Cloud PC. They were issued this. They had pre-set up. Some of this obviously requires that your FIDO2 key is already set up and established. So they have their authenticator set up. They approve the request on their phone. Obviously, with number matching, they match that. And then it says, well, your organization requires an additional sign-in method. And Alan says, okay, I have my FIDO2 key plugged in. I plug it in. I put in my PIN number. I authorize that sign-in. I touch my security key. Now it says, okay, let me verify that. Is this FIDO2 registered? Great, you authenticated, you're good. Now you provided me that stronger authentication method. I go to my Cloud PC. I say, okay, now that I'm authenticated, I'm able to connect. I hit connect, and then eventually, it connects me straight into my Windows 365 Cloud PC, and I'm able to sign in. As you see here, we applied the principle of conditional access and requiring that strong authentication so that the user had to provide that in order to access their Windows 365 Cloud PC. Now, in our other scenario, we want to look at what happens when you sign in. So I talked earlier about a scenario where we want to restrict. What's more common is you might have a list of, say, contractors or list of users that you don't provide company managed devices, and you want to restrict their access. You want to say, okay, how can I prevent them from using their own machine? Well, I am going to issue them Cloud PCs, which are managed and these are managed machines managed by Microsoft Intune. They're corporate devices. These are devices that we manage and own. We're going to provide that. And we're going to require that if you try to sign in with through any other means, we're going to go ahead and block you. So here we see Alan tried to sign in. They're like, okay, let me try with my own machine. I don't want to use the Cloud PC. I want to just use my browser. I want to just sign into my email, right? They try to attempt to sign in. They think they're good. They do MFA, and all of a sudden, Entry ID says, oh, I'm going to block you, right? So the reason that happened is because Entry ID came in and said, they validated your sign-in, and then that's where it tried to authorize you. It said, do you meet the conditions? And it said, okay, what are you trying to connect from? You're using your own browser, and it blocked you. So that happened because we had a conditional access policy restricting that capability. Now, second, you see compliant device, and we'll see that when we get into endpoints, when we look at like what happens from signing into a compliant device. But I wanted to show you kind of how conditional access can address this too. What we've seen is this is a big area, a big ask from customers, is they want to know how do we control and manage compliant devices. Well, you can't really use this functionality until you make sure you can manage all your devices. I mentioned earlier how endpoints can be a big weak point because you have different types of endpoints across your stack. So you have to bring them to a central location to manage all of those so you can have and know which are your corporate managed devices so that then you can apply those principles of conditional access to authorize that access. Now here in our second demo, we're showing how Alan, let's say it's Alan or a bad actor, right? signing in and they somehow got the credentials. You know, Alex here is signing in, and they're using a unknown device. You know, somehow their browser was modified, their user agent has been modified that makes it not seem like it's a Windows device. And all of a sudden, after signing in, the Entra ID came back with a block message. Now, the reason, again, this happened is because we had a conditional access policy that restricted unknown platforms, right? So we said if you log in from an unknown platform, if you log in from anything besides Windows, Mac OS, iOS, or Android, we're going to block you. So Entra ID, after the initial authentication, blocked Alex and said, sorry, we can't allow you to sign in because you don't meet that condition. Now here, we have Alex again signing in. Now we look below and we see that there's been some risky activity on Alex's account where somebody tried to attempt to log in from an anonymous IP address. So Alex here is signing in like they normally do. You know, they're signing in and, you know, they provide their password and they sign in normally. Next thing, they will get their MFA prompt and they provide that, you know, second layer of authentication. They provide MFA. And then they get this message stating, oh, you know, you have to update your password because someone, it looks like they tried to sign in. And the reason that got triggered is because we have Entra ID protection. We had a user risk policy that detected that this user was at risk because there's activity occurring from anonymous IP addresses. And because of that, it says, okay, I'm gonna make this user change their password. Now, you might ask, well, how is this going to prevent, or how did this protect a bad actor, obviously, from doing this? Well, generally speaking, a bad actor will have your password, right? And because they thought they were actually going to successfully complete the sign-in, well, Entra ID protection kicked in and says, oh, there's a risk going on, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force you to do MFA, right? And the bad actor sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to send the request. Maybe the user will approve it. Well, you saw how we had number matching. I can't stress how important that is. If you have, if you're using the Authenticator app today and you're not using number matching, it's absolutely critical, because one of the weak points with Authenticator and using it is MFA fatigue. So if you just send an authentication request without necessarily providing that extra layer of number matching, a user might get a bunch of authentication methods and eventually just approve it and they're able to sign in. By having that number matching, it would be almost impossible for somebody to approve a request without knowing the number, right? So once you perform that secure authentication, Entra ID said, okay, now I'll make you change your password because you were at risk. Once you do that, it says, okay, the risk is mitigated. You auto remediated the risk without an admin having to go and do anything. So this is absolutely critical. This is very powerful component of Entra ID. And like I mentioned, it uses, you know, the millions of signals and machine learning to analyze all of your sign-ins to really understand. And this is only one type of risk. Now, you know, there's tons and tons of types of risk, including things like atypical travel, using anomalous token if your token was stolen, things like password spray attacks. So if the same password was used on 20 different accounts in your organization, it's able to identify that, right? If you're logging in from an infrequent country, as an example, that you've never logged in from, if you're logging in from a random device that Entra ID sees that you've never logged in from, right? These are all very, very critical signals that it has to look at. You can't just look at a single sign-in and say, oh, okay, you provided MFA, you're good. Well, what if you're coming from a compromised device? What if you're coming behind the private VPN, or you're coming from a Tor IP address, right? You want to make sure that you have a system that can identify that and not only just authenticate you and say, okay, you did MFA, which is great, but it's not a single solution that's going to protect you. It's layering that with all this machine learning, which Microsoft does an amazing job at. It brings that in and kind of gives you that protection with Entra ID protection. So this is our this kind of completes our first set of demos for identity. Now, in our second set of demos, we're going to kind of get into endpoints. And I want to kind of show you how we're using the security solutions to protect our endpoints, right? So using Microsoft Intune, we have our devices fully managed through Microsoft Intune. And so I'm going to kind of show you some scenarios and what happens when a user attempts to sign in to their Microsoft 365 account from a non-compliant device. Let's say, and that could also be a compliant device which became non-compliant. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, your device became compliant at some point. Now it's always going to remain compliant, because what might happen is maybe there's a threat on your machine. Maybe there's some sort of threat, and that's where you have Defender for Endpoint interconnected with Microsoft Intune, so they could talk to one another. Microsoft the Defender for Endpoint will tell Intune, hey, by the way, there's a threat on this machine. This machine is at high risk, and it will mark that, and it will make your device non-compliant. And with that, Intune will then take that signal, give that to Entra ID, and then when you're actually authenticating, it'll say, "Oh, sorry, you're on a non-compliant device," and then you'll notify IT saying, "Hey, what's going on? My device is showing non-compliant," and then IT will kind of come in. And I'm excited to kind of show you how IT can, or somebody, admins can look at that and then do, device isolation to isolate your device, and you will see that shortly as it come up. So in our first scenario, we're going to look at a user accessing from a non-compliant device. In the second scenario, we're going to see what happens. A user receives some multiple zip files, and they open it unknowingly, thinking these are good files. They open the files, they run it, and all of a sudden, they notice that it's been blocked. Well, they get surprised because they're not really sure what's going on. But the reason that's happening is because Defender antivirus is coming in and blocking that threat and quarantining that file, so it prevents the user from running it. So we'll see that shortly. And then also we're going to look at a scenario where IT identified, a specific device is at high risk. They look at the device timeline. They see, oh my God, there's a lot of threats going on this device. What's going on? There's malware detected. Something's not right. So they isolate that device, and you'll see how in almost near real time, which to me is amazing, how in near real time, and this device, by the way, is not connected to your network. This device is not on your firewall where you could just, block network access. This device can be anywhere in the world. And Defender for Endpoint immediately isolates this device, cuts off all network access, and you'll see how that works, and you'll see what happens to the end user when that happens. And also you'll see a scenario how Defender for Endpoint, user gets some URLs, tries to click on it, and you'll see what happens when the user clicks on it and they get blocked. So let's get into the demos. So in our first scenario, we have a user who, is logging in from a non-compliant device, or could be a compliant device potentially that was compliant at some point, but now it's marked as non-compliant. So they sign in, and this user is using passwordless. So they do the authenticator app, and they see that they can't sign in. And again, the reason this came in is because we use a combination of Microsoft Intune to evaluate your device compliance status, to look at whether your device is compliant, to look at Defender for Endpoint to see if there's any risks on your device, and that your risk level is either cleared and make sure there is no risk. And if any of those conditions are not met, it marks your device as non-compliant and you're not able to access it. Now, if you are truly using your own device and it's a BYOD device, right, that's not managed by Intune, well, Intune has no recollection of that device, will not know that it's a compliant device, and you try to sign in, you do MFA, and you get blocked and restricted. So that's kind of what we're seeing here on this first section. So now we see, some how Defender for Endpoint provides real-time protection. So these are just some quick screenshots, kind of show you what it looks like when you access that file. And you'll see shortly a demo of what happens when you actually click on the file and the message that you see. These are kind of the things you see that, Notepad was unable to open the file because it had a virus. And it'll show you that the data has been uploaded to Defender for Endpoint Detection Service for additional monitoring. Now here, I mentioned earlier what happened. So user is, receives this zip file, they downloaded it, or and it says HR files. They assumed, everything is fine. They downloaded that file, and all of a sudden, after extracting that, they see a message saying threats found. Right? They open that file, and it has a file in there with the random digits. Users like, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. What is this, file? Does something look off? Should I open it? But before they even get a chance to open it, you see that the file just goes away. Well, what happened is Defender Antivirus kicked in. It quarantined that file. It published that in your timeline and in Defender Stack for admins to review, and it protected that threat by not allowing you to run that file. Imagine you didn't have this and the file was able to run, right? Imagine that this file was able to run. So definitely do a lot of damage in the environment. And this is just one vector, right? Imagine this file got spread around to different machines. So having that Defender antivirus and that real-time cloud delivered protection in your real time, after you open that device and after you click on it, it's able to protect you and block you from running that file. So this is absolutely critical to make sure you have cloud delivered protection, and that's what Defender Endpoint will provide on your workstations. So this is just one example. So, there could be multitude of different ways that Defender for Endpoint is, protecting, but wanted to make sure I kind of show you kind of in real time what happens when that scenario comes up. Now here is a quick timeline of the devices. So we take a look at that previous device, and that device was open that file. Well, what does an admin see when they go to the device timeline? Well, they see all this activity. They see, oh, there's additional information. There was malware detected. It detected that antivirus detected malware, and it was prevented. So it gives you a good timeline of exactly what happened. So you're able to use forensics to identify, kind of look further, look at the remainder of the timeline, and see what happened next on that device. So now in our next step, we see you see some of the additional examples of how the files were quarantined. Again, we have another text file that was user downloaded or was on the machine, tried to open it, and again the file was quarantined. And then you see how device isolation, that's a quick message, and we're going to see that shortly in a demo. What happens when you isolate that device? What happens when network access is completely cut off on that device? User will see that message that you're seeing here. All right, so the first scenario is the URL. So imagine the user received an email. They got that email from their admin saying, hey, I want you to, I need your calendar access. Something very simple, right? Free busy. And imagine this is a bad actor mimicking your admin. They sent them a message with some link saying, hey, click here for free busy. And then all of a sudden, they got blocked, right? Well, that happened because Defender Smart Screen and Defender for Endpoint blocked that URL. So sorry, I can't allow you to, access that link. I'm going to protect you, and I'm not going to. This URL is unsafe, and it prevented the user from kind of clicking through and doing anything further. Now the bad actor said, okay, I'll be a little bit clever, and I'll add a second link, and I'll say, hey, if you have issues, just use the second link, right? And you're like, okay, maybe something's wrong with that other link. Maybe there's a problem. Well, again, same thing. They get blocked again. They're not able to click through that link. So Defender for Endpoint and the URL reputation knows that this is a bad URL and protected the user by not allowing them to kind of click through. All right, now we look at real-time device isolation. So in this scenario, admin at RavDemo looked at this device and said, okay, there's a risk, right? I'm afraid something's wrong with this device. I'm seeing a lot of unusual activity. I want to isolate this device. So I go to the device, and you'll see in the timeline in almost real time, the minute I click confirm that I want to isolate this device and click confirm, the device on the other end will automatically lose network access. So once the admin clicks confirm, immediately the device says, oh, network access has been disabled. It's nearly in real time. And the user says, oh, I don't know what's going on. Why is this happening? They try to click through, and you see here, they can't do anything because all their network access is fully blocked. They try to get to their email or do anything. They're completely restricted. and they'll see that, nothing's loading, what's going on. Now this protected the device. So as an admin, now you're able to do additional forensics, look at malware, run hunting queries to see if this threat is on any other devices, right? You see the user struggling. They're like, okay, let me go to private browsing. Let me see what else I can do. I'm not sure what's going on. But it's because internet access has been blocked. The only communication the device will have is communication with Defender for Endpoint, so you can perform that forensics and do any analysis on that device. So you can do live response and other actions on that device, and to see kind of what's going on before you bring the device back onto the network. And here, now let's assume that we completed our forensics. We saw that the device is good. We don't have any other threats in the environment. Now the admin says, okay, I'm going to bring this device back online. I'm going to unisolate or remove that device isolation. They go to the device plane in Defender Security Center, and they remove the device from isolation. So you'll see in almost near real time. The amazing part is it truly is in near real time, which to me is amazing how you can do that, wherever the device is. So I put some comments saying I went through the device and everything's good, no issues found. The minute they hit, you'll see the minute they hit confirm, they confirm that the device is good. And once that happens, the network access is restored. The user, is able to refresh their page, and they're back completely online as if nothing happened, right? So this is, to me, absolutely critical component. Now, with additional security solutions with Microsoft Sentinel, Defender XDR, and combining all that, there's ways to, now what I demoed to you is a manual way to device. We're using things like automatic attack disruption and other automated ways. Microsoft is able in certain scenarios to automate this device isolation, and you're able to use other playbooks to automate some of these capabilities in device isolation. But I wanted to, of course, show you some manual ways how you can apply these security measures. So, and with that being said, that kind of completes our demo, and that completes our first section of talking about identities and endpoints. And I will pass it to Lai to talk about what's next and to kind of give you a quick recap and kind of talk about what's next on our webinar too. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. And Lai, go ahead and take over.
QSI for the demo. That was very very informative. A lot of good stuff, and hopefully people in the audience are able to really understand all the complexities when it comes to securing the environment and how Microsoft comes in to really provide that extra layer of protection and helping organizations protect their assets and their data. That being said, so the question now is what's next? How do we get to the path of zero trust, and what can we do from the Ravanty side to help customers and clients get to that end state, right? So with Ravanty, what we can do is we can work with you to carry out a comprehensive security assessment across obviously all the 4 major pillars. And depending on where you are at within your cloud journey, we can tailor our security assessments to bring you closer to that zero trust security posture, and also provide you with recommendations specific to your organization alongside a roadmap to getting to zero trust. The idea is really to understand your environment, understand where you're at, provide you with all the necessary tools and information to get you to a state where, an ideal state where you have all the security components in place to protect your environment, your assets. How we think this will be helpful is because we will essentially look at maximizing your ROI, your return on investment on existing Microsoft licenses that you've purchased. We work with a lot of organizations who may have purchased a license SKU and not realize that they've not utilized only a small fraction of that license SKU, and not realizing that there are a lot more within that license SKU that they can definitely leverage to improve their security posture, right? And so by working with you and uncovering your current or looking at your current setup, we can uncover all the values of underused features within your environment and really helping you utilize the investment that you've already put within your environment. And so you can definitely reach out to us. We've provided the contact information here for you to reach out, and we can definitely start that conversation and help and work with you to help you get to that zero trust end state as mentioned. With that, we'd like to wrap it up with some Q&A for the webinar session. Shane, I believe there were some questions that came up, and so if you can provide those out, and we can definitely answer any questions that the audience may have.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the ones because I think they came in kind of near the end of your demo, Yasai. I think it's the same person asking 3 questions in the relation to each other. So I'll kind of ask you all 3. But we have seen many occasions where it takes a while before a defender blocks the link. What is the reason for that? And then I think how long does that process take? I've seen it take a long time on occasion. Any ideas to that? Yes, you think you can answer that? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So depending on that link, there's different types of threats naturally. Microsoft tries to, analyze links as they come in. So it really depends on the reputation of that link. Is this possibly like a 0-day? Is this something that hasn't been seen before? Generally speaking, it really depends on. Now, links can be different. It could be a different file. It could be a type, attacks get more and more sophisticated. It could be that first time that link is being detected, and maybe that first time, that URL won't get blocked. Now, it really depends if it really kind of comes to what type of link that is and where it's kind of pointing to, and just making sure you have all the components. You want to also make sure you have all the real-time protection, cloud delivered protection, all those capabilities kind of configured correctly, and you have your antivirus in active mode versus it being in passive mode. So those are, I would start with there, making sure you verify all of those components are in place, that you have the proper endpoint security policies pushed to your devices to make sure that you reduce that time frame. But that can happen if it's a newer attack, a newer vulnerability, and Microsoft possibly hasn't, seen that maybe before, and it's kind of the first time. So, but generally speaking, I mean, once you kind of click through, and if you have, and we'll talk about like Defender for Office, if you have URL rewrite, it will rewrite that URL so that as a user clicks through it, Microsoft will look at that link and will analyze it rather than at time of click. So it's able to rewrite that URL. So taking a look at that, make sure you have all that in place will help kind of minimize that time frame, of course.
Thanks, Yasai. Maybe that's a topic for us to maybe consider putting in our blog and our resources. I will send the link to our resources page for everybody to see. Okay, so let's see. If we are currently using a different endpoint security product, can we still deploy Defender for Endpoint alongside the existing solution, or no?
You absolutely can. I mean, the great part of Defender for Endpoint is, and I talk to organizations all the time about this as well. If you are using a different endpoint security product, you're definitely able to pilot and test with your devices in passive mode, right? So rather than say, okay, we have to holistically move all our devices, we have to move active protection, you absolutely can use Defender for Endpoint in a passive mode. At least you get all the different alerting mechanisms from Defender. You see how Defender would act upon those threats before you move your devices to active, or before you move fully to Defender for Endpoint. So that's absolutely a scenario that is fully supported. And you can put your different Windows and Mac devices in passive mode. We've helped organizations in that exact scenario. And then as you transition and you move some devices to active before you move all your other devices. So yes, that's absolutely a plan that you can implement with no issues.
Okay. Another one here. Thanks, Yasai. How do I know if my environment is not already compromised? And what can I do to proactively prevent security attacks? How's it going?
Great
You might need a
question.
whole day for that.
Yeah, I'll quickly summarize. I mean, it all starts with that initial assessment, right? You have to assess your environment. You have to assess across all your It's not just, oh, do you have MFA? Oh, you're protected. Oh, do you use device? It doesn't. It starts with doing a holistic security assessment across all your pillars, right? Look at all your identity. Look at all your devices. Look at all your policies. Look at your existing settings in Entra ID. How are you implementing? What type of conditional access policies do you have? It's looking at that holistically, performing that security assessment, and then creating that roadmap to move forward, right? So in order for you to identify, you have to first do that initial assessment and discovery, and then also look at across your sign-ins and all your sign-in logs to see if there's anything occurring. Look at your risky users. Is there risky users identified? You know, we've had organizations who've had lists of risky users that are there, but nothing's happening, right? So that's a common scenario we've seen. So to start, in order for you to have any idea of that happened, you have to start from there and then kind of take step from there. If you have Defender for Endpoint already rolled out, look at your devices, look at their risk scores, and kind of take it from there. And then, of course, start with applying measures to protect against those risks.
Okay, we have one more in the queue, but before everybody goes, I know it's past time, but feel free to stay on for the question. But just a reminder, next week we do have our part 2. You'll be getting an email from us around the session details. We'll be covering and diving into those zero trust pillars, data and apps. We'll have another demo walkthrough, part 2. And then we're going to jump into some of the cybersecurity threats. And then we're going to walk through some of the Ravanty's customer examples. So getting into the nitty gritty of what we're seeing on the field, and maybe that will apply to you and how to address that. And that is on February 5th, 9 a.m. PST, 11 a.m. Central. So thank you. Yasai, one more question. If I'm using a third-party identity management solution for single sign-on or MFA, what integration capabilities do I have with the Microsoft security stack? It's a little bit of a techie one. Is there any integrations that they could bake in?
Yeah, you definitely can. That's a great question. We've seen that in common scenarios. Now, most organizations kind of analyze that and understand, you first ask what identity provider obviously you're using to try to first understand that. And there are ways to integrate, some of the tools with Entra ID and some of the layers of conditional access, even though you are using a third-party identity provider. So you can apply that principle. You can apply, bring in MFA providers. If you use a different MFA provider, you can connect that with, say, Entra ID. So you can do, say, a different MFA provider as you're authenticating. So there are ways to create that interoperability across identity providers. You get the most power and you maximize the most when you use Entra ID as your primary identity and access management solution. But we've had organizations who are on, say, a different identity provider, and they're looking to transition to Entra ID. So we at least put some safeguards in place with things within conditional access to at least protect some of those sign-ins as they transition to Entra ID. So there are options for interoperability. If you have any specific unique scenarios, yeah, glad to deep dive further and talk in your scenario, because each identity provider is unique in what they provide and how you can kind of bring that into Entra ID. So.
Okay. Thanks again, Yasai and Lai. Thanks for everybody who joined us today. We are so pumped for session 2. We think you're really going to enjoy it. So we will be sending out the details for that. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Take care.